All right, welcome everyone to our monthly sync up with the security team. James, you have the first item.
Yes, yeah. So it's kind of also covered in the table above, but one of our biggest pain points right now is just the sheer volume of findings in the dashboards, and just wanted to check with you guys on what if you have any tips on how we can manage those things or changes that we can make to address that.
So is there a specific scanner? Because I know DAST was one of the main issues before. Is that still the main issue, or are there other scanners that are involved there?
Pretty much all of them.
Yeah, DAST is a big one, but also several others.
Okay. For DAST, we just merged the aggregated vulnerabilities into I guess we just turned it on by default. So you should, once you upgrade, because I know that the other one that we were working on that you wanted to, for DAST, wanted to have the ability to include or exclude specific vulnerabilities or vulnerability checks. That was also merged. So I think that hopefully we should be good for all of you to upgrade the DAST version and try that out, and that might solve, or hopefully that will solve the issue on the DAST side. I can't speak to the other scanners, but for DAST, I think that will help a lot.
Do you think in maybe the default templates we could have some kind of way to only include like the high confidence findings or something like that?
We can do that already. Just using a post script. So you include the template and you just define a post script in the same jobs, and you use JQ to filter out what you don't want.
I think Dominic, you had a point under there if you want to verbalize that one.
Yeah, I missed the very beginning. Are we on the first point of the agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just saying that I know you, like you mentioned, you don't want to have a hard delete to delete everything, but in our current situation with the noise we have, and also just when even for another project you're experimenting, you just add a new analyzer, and then it adds crazy amount of noise, and there's just no way to get rid of it once it's there. So we really need something to just massively delete / archive / hide vulnerabilities to make the report usable, because right now there's so much noise, we'll just never get through it, and so much noise gets added. So what we want to do is remove the noisy analyzers. But even if we do that, we have like 50,000 results that we can never get rid of. So even if we remove all analyzers and only use one that's super high confidence, we would never see the new results just kind of hidden in the massive amount of data. So yeah, just say, I understand the compliance thing that we don't want to just delete vulnerabilities and just hand wave them away that they never existed, but like a archive button or something that maybe the data exists somewhere, but just on this day we just started over, or a big massive dismiss button if that's what we have to do. But just say, yeah, I remember also in the runner that doesn't have as many issues, we enabled by mistake the scanners on the vendor directory, which is vendor code from third parties that we don't want to scan. It added thousands of issues and we're stuck with it. So yeah, I mean, we could have scripts, we could have hacks and whatnot, but we're going to have like a post pipeline that's gigantic and error prone. So it would be nice to be able to clean up the dashboard as a feature. And more than nice, actually, because right now it's really just making it extremely difficult to use the vulnerability report for us.
So I'll say I like the archive as a feature better than the delete because it always comes down to the compliance question. I do wonder if in the shorter term, since that script will delete all of the records, if it would be possible to modify it to just extract all that data and I don't know where we would store it and then run the delete. So you at least have something workable in the short term. Because realistically, that's not going to be on my near-term roadmap for the archive button. It's something that comes up occasionally, but it's usually where a customer has configured something incorrectly for one project where they're doing their initial test configurations and use the live project. And they're like, I want the project to go back to 0. But once they get past that, they typically don't ever need it again. So it's one of those things that's important, but doesn't necessarily rise higher than some of the other things. So I think working with the infrastructure team is probably the best bet to get something within the next few months if you need it.
Okay, that works.
Did anyone else want to vocalize their items from number 1? I'm going to take that as a no. Philippe, do we want to move on to number 2 then?
Yes, thank you. So that's going to be a big one. We discovered this week that actually this table that we have at the top of the doc is that it was not accurate. That was completely obsolete. So we did the complete refresh yesterday. Not sure if all the categories that we have in the first column are still accurate or not. We striked through the ones that seems to us obsolete as well. So I guess since we don't have a lot of things in the agenda, we can go through this table, make sure that we are all aligned on the current pain points that we have, because I realized lately I'm working on this big inventory of the projects that we're using at GitLab to build a product. And every time I share my progress or what I'm doing, I realize that not everyone is aware of the pain points that we have, and that's definitely on us. We have difficulties to share and to give feedback on where we want to go, what are the roadblocks that we are facing. And I think this table could be a good starting point. So we did our best, at least yesterday, to put everything in there. Obviously, it's not complete, but it's again a good start. And in the sake of iteration, we need to start somewhere. So that's the spirit here. What do you think about going through them one by one? Does that work for you? All right. So for SAST, mostly it's not specific to SAST, actually. It's also in dependency scanning, but we can see that a lot more in SAST. The location tracking is obviously an issue, because every time we dismiss something and we do the triage process, if anything in the code is moving and there was a vulnerability in there, we're going to create a new vulnerability. So that's a huge problem for us, because if you do the triaging process yourself all the time, that's easy to spot because you have this muscle memory of the findings that you already dismissed. But if you do that with multiple people, this is actually what we do in the AppSec team, it's really hard to figure out if it's really new or if it's not. So we created some issues to improve that, but the location tracking is adding a lot of noise on top of everything. So that's something that you are working on. We know that, but we just wanted to remind you that it's probably the major pain point that we have with SAST. And also the noise in the results. The ESLint is giving us a lot of results. Can't remember what was this example, Ethan, that you added.
That was actually from GoSec.
Oh, GoSec, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, any questions or comments on that? We don't have. No.
I know that vulnerability research is working on both of those, to some extent. But, just we wanted to make sure they were documented.
And we don't have Taylor with us today, so going to skip to the next one. We kept what was there. Honestly, we haven't made any progress on our side with that, so it's probably a bit obsolete as well. We are obviously waiting for the aggregation of results. And as Dominic said, we will do a complete wipeout of all the findings that we have, because we have more than 60K. And I think we are hitting a limit on GitLab, the project. So we might want to start over completely. We will do that with CERT or anyone who's got an admin access. We probably need a console for that, but that's the idea. We will start over and we will share the progress as soon as we start that. All right, for dependency scanning, that was not well communicated on our side, so that's why I added this, and that's mostly why we are creating this inventory. Every time I share my progress again on the inventory, I got the same feedback. But we have a dependency list page. Why don't you use that? Well, I'd actually try to use that. Be my guest. It's there. The data is there, but there's no search in this dependency list. So if you use the GitLab project, for example, you have 75 pages of dependencies. There's no way we can find anything in there. There were some bugs, like, for example, if the pipeline is running, suddenly the list is empty, waiting for the latest pipeline to finish. So that's an issue as well. It's probably going to be fixed in the next iteration. And we don't have a good overview of all the projects that we want to monitor. That's the major problem that we have with dependencies and or supply chain in general. We can start with the GitLab project, but we don't have a clear path to follow when it comes to dependencies and the software bill of material. So for example, this inventory that we are building, we are cherry picking projects one by one in every single project that we have in GitLab org, GitLab com, GitLab services, GitLab data, and so on. Believe me, that's extremely tedious. I'm talking about more than 2,000 projects. And we have to pick them one by one, just to make sure that we are picking the right ones, the ones that are really matter for the build of GitLab or for the tooling that we're using around GitLab, etc. So that's extremely painful for us. And I'm not even sure that we are close to having something that we will be able to use in the future, the product. So the inventory will be handed over to the product once it's ready to ship, which is probably by the end of the quarter. We also don't have the higher level of dependencies, meaning that the interpreters and compilers. So for example, a few months ago, we had a big advisory, an RC in Go, that we had to fix. So by updating the Go versions that we're using, and we had no idea where Go was used, which versions we were using, what they were used for, if there was just to build something for a tool, if it was built to build something that was going to be shipped in GitLab. So it took me like 6 months, and I'm not kidding. It took me 6 months to just ask around and be able to upgrade these Go versions. So I'm really crossing fingers that the inventory will be finished before the next RC is out, because I don't want to do that again. And Ethan, you want to speak to the last point, the dependency review boat work that we're doing right in the middle of the table? I'm
Yeah.
highlighting.
So, I mean, so we're working on this, but I just wanted to add this in here that, and because I think it would be useful for customers, and we're going down that route, but just the idea that like having metadata about your dependencies also included and available to see. I linked the issue about the dependency review bot and how we're sort of doing that in terms of like collecting different information about the packages, when they were last updated, all of that good stuff. I just wanted to capture it there since it is something that we feel is important for our supply chain work, and to make sure that we're on the same page in terms of like usefulness and stuff like that. I mean, in the end, also, like, we're working on building it out now, but ideally we would hand it over at some point to be to be properly engineered and maybe integrated in the future.
All right, and since we don't have Nico with us, I will
Yeah.
jump to the next point, which is first testing. And
I can speak to that too.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So Costel has been working on building out some of the API fuzzing stuff. I know he has had at least one successful, or he's had success running it. The challenge that we're having, and it's not necessarily the product itself, is that GitLab doesn't have like an open API or Swagger definition file, so he's hand defining all of it, which for the size of our API would take a while. It's on hold now because we had to move him to a different priority, but it is on our roadmap to continue that work at some point, and have a similar to Dast, having like nightly API fuzzing jobs running.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll look at the fuzzing with that issue that's linked there, the fuzzing for Rails, and see when we can schedule it. Right now, we're working on replacing the Dast API engine with the Peach engine, which, since we acquired it and it does Dast and fuzzing, we're putting that into Dast API. So as soon as that's done, the main engineers will have time to go back and start working on new features. So I can look at prioritizing that in with all the other things that we've got. So yeah, I'll keep that in mind.
Cool, thank you.
All right, we found a few things actually for vulnerability research, but we don't have Taylor with us. So we'll go real quick on these ones. Maybe Dominic, you want to speak to these points that were added by you in the first place?
Yeah,
I'm highlighting them in the doc.
just this is not a it's a product request, but at the same time, I'm aware that this is very tied to our own workflow, and probably not for everyone, but many of our CV requests are basically copy pasting a bunch of issues and a bunch of data from the issues, and we actually, that's our fault, but there are mistakes in that process, and the affected version, basically from that, for GitLab, you can extract the fixed version and you can extract the solution, which is always please update to X, Y, and Z. So it would be kind of nice for us to have a way to, either with the CV request button that we haven't seen because we're not maintainers, or through the kind of automation behind the scenes that exists with that, to input the affected range and let the machine figure out the other the other fields because it's really just copy pasting a bunch of stuff. And we often request CVEs before we know the exact version numbers. So we have a bunch of fixed in 13.12.x, and then one of those X's makes its way to the blog post because we forgot to patch one of them, which is our fault, but it could be automated away. So yeah, that's kind of if we could see the CV request. I've never seen the CV request button. I don't know what it does when we click on it. So, but I feel like part of that workflow might have some.
I think it just takes you to the CVE issue tracker and opens a new template for it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, but as I said, not everyone's going to work like that. But I think in many cases, the end of the affected versions range usually is the fixed version. So we could have like by default, this is the default behavior. And if you want to explicitly override those fixed versions, then you do it manually. But the default template could do a little more stuff to be friendly and save some time and mistakes. That was it for me.
Hey, Dominic, I have a question about that. So I didn't realize the button was maintainers and above. Is there anything you have to do to enable that on a project? Because when I look at like my personal projects on GitLab.com under my work account, I'm an owner and I don't see the button on any of my issues. And
I think
It has to be public. Yeah, there's a feature flag, and it also has to be a public project. Because we're only a CNA for public projects on GitLab.com, not other projects.
that makes sense. Do we have that clearly documented? It seems like we have a very long sort of like if-then statement to get to where you see the button.
You'd have to ask Mark Art.
Okay.
I'll have to, or Taylor. Yeah, I'll have to defer to them. But yeah.
All right, I jump ahead to the next one. That's for you actually, Matt, and I'm pretty sure we won't be able to cover everything, but real quick, I added the issues that we use to track the requirements that we have on our side for threat insights, which are most of our requirements. It's probably too big for this table, so that's why we use this issue. We create one issue per quarter, so that we can track the progression on that and see how well we're doing with that. That was added by Dominic. I will cover that real quick. We already covered that at the beginning of the meeting. The clean state button, that's something that we really need to be able to deal with the number of findings that we have and maybe wipe out everything. Dismissing is going to be problematic because if we search something, we're going to have the thousands of old findings in the DB that we will search as well. That's not going to work for us. And mostly it's not scanning for GitLab, first of all, and for large projects. We have too many findings, timeouts when we want to dismiss a bulk of findings. For example, if we select too many findings at once, it's timing out. So we have a lot of different issues related to that. So we need to come up with a solution for this. And I added something in Matt for one-on-one this afternoon to talk about this, by the way. That's something that I already talked about. When we do the triaging process with more than one engineer, it's really hard to figure out what is really new from what is just noise because of the location change, for example. So having suggestions could save us some time. That's nice to have. It's not blocking us, but that could be useful. Coming from Ethan, we don't have a way to filter out by image in container scanning. So that's something that we also echoed a bit lower in the table for container security. we have some pipelines scanning a lot of different images because we generate just more than one image in these pipelines. So hopefully we can gather the results and parse the results correctly, but once they are in the dashboard, there's no way to understand where they are coming from, and we have thousands of results sometimes. Once we enable container scanning, it lights up like a Christmas tree, so that's a big issue for us. The last one here, the merge request security widget not being stable. Those were for something that disappeared from the table. I don't know why. That was for the usage, the dogfooding, especially of the security gates, what we call the merge request security approvals, if I remember correctly. We are anywhere near a state where we would be able to enable that on GitLab. So that's an issue. We don't enable that because we think it's not going to work for us. It's going to block a lot of people. So until it's fixed, we just don't dogfood the feature. And if we don't dogfood it, it's not going to evolve. So that's something that we will need to address. And the last one is something interesting that was created by Tago this week, I guess, like a few days ago, where some findings, similar findings are based on rules. We would be able to automatically triage things. So that's something we would like to explore in the future, but that's very, very low in the table. It's nice to have in the future. We understand it's great, but we have other priorities for now. And as for container scanning, Ethan, you want to cover that maybe? Because you added most of the content there. Thanks.
I mean, Sam, we've talked about most of this already, but the challenge we're facing here at GitLab is, well, there's two big ones. One is we don't build single containers and single pipelines. We build all of our containers in one pipeline. And we talked about, we currently have a way of triggering another pipeline that sends a list of containers, and we do it that way. But you've also said that we could dynamically create multiple jobs for each container within the same pipeline, which is something we need to explore still. The challenge then becomes, even if we do that, like in the dashboard, it's, especially this isn't that, like with if the base image has a lot of findings, then you get like 50,000 findings in one thing, and we can't filter by individual containers, and so that can be challenging too.
I know we're at time. If anyone needs to drop, feel free to go ahead and drop. I have time I can stay on, so I can route things as needed to various parties. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Ethan.
Oh yeah, no problem. And then the other thing that we're looking at, which is not, is basically, we have a requirement for scanning all containers in production, which means third-party containers that aren't built within GitLab. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just letting you know that that's a problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, so you can scan you can scan images today that are not built with GitLab. It does not have to be built by GitLab
right.
for you to scan it. You can scan out to any external registry. One of the big reasons for us switching to Trivy was because it made it a whole lot easier for us to do that production vulnerability scanning. Our first iteration of production vulnerability scanning may come out as early as 14.1. So
okay.
we're that was one of the big reasons for moving to Trivy, and we're working on that right on the heels of that switch.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the challenge for us right now, and I'm not saying this is something GitLab container scanning is supposed to solve, is like finding those third-party things, the third-party containers that we're running within GitLab and how we do our infrastructure and everything. So I'm just saying that, not expecting you to solve it, but Yeah, I mean, like, especially for actioning the container results, like being able to filter like the per container within in the dashboard would be great. Or
Yeah, so that, I mean, so that it gets tricky because there's overlap between container scanning and vulnerability management. That filter would
Yeah.
actually fall under Matt's team under vulnerability
Mhm.
management. But when we do implement the production container scanning, we're planning to have a separate tab. So you'll have one tab for anything that was found as part of the pipeline, and then a second tab for anything that's external vulnerabilities. I think Annabelle actually might set up a meeting with you soon. She's trying to validate some of the designs around that. But
Okay.
We will have an image filter, if not as part of the first release coming, you know, in a follow-on release to let you filter by image in that external tab. I'll have to defer to Matt on timing for an image filter in the main project tab though.
Yeah, what we'll probably do in this case, so Annabelle's actually able to leverage some of the future looking designs, excuse me, that Andy had designed around not a drop-down filter, but more of like the issue list or the MR filter where there's actually filterable keywords inside of it. I think that's probably the more appropriate direction to cut over for something like a container image, which is not going to apply to the majority of the scanners. So when we start getting these more kind of like specific and advanced filtering cases, that's ultimately where we want to head on the vulnerability report. So I think if Sam is able to get there first, we can actually reuse, it's not the component that's a challenge for us, it's going to be the performance of the backing search itself. Because I don't believe we had anything in Elasticsearch for that type of data right now. And given the volume of vulnerability records, I think that would be a non-starter to do it out of the Postgres database.
Okay.
All right, I will have to drop as well. I'm sorry that was a bit a one-way meeting, but really wanted to share that so that the next time you would be able to come back to us with some details and some insights on all of these points, maybe.
And we'll do our best to keep that updated, the table above, just to.
Yeah, sounds good. Just on that last point though, the approval rules are rigid. We know that we have not invested in that area in a long time. The board approved us to hire one new developer and they're actually kind of swap things around, but it's actually going to be Zamir and he started on Monday of this week. So he's dedicated 100% full-time to nothing but security approvals. So we will start seeing some progress there. We have, we're actually planning to move that into our security policy UI to bring all sorts of benefits, but we can do a deep dive on that later if people need to drop.
Awesome. So I will let you cover that if you want, but from my side, I really need to go.
Yeah.
Thank you, girl. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah. I need
Thanks,
to go
everyone.
as well. Yep.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.